Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Freeland, and I'm a librarian at the Internet Archive. I want to welcome you to today's book talk. In The Secret Life of Data, authors Aram Sinnreich and Jesse Gilbert explore the many unpredictable and often surprising ways in which data surveillance, AI, and the constant presence of algorithms impact our culture and society in the age of global networks. Today's conversation will be led by tech scholar Laura DeNardis, author of the classic text, The Global War for Internet Governance. As we start up here, I'd like to make sure that you've pre-ordered your copy of The Secret Life of Data. It's out on April 30th. You can pre-order it now. We have Duncan, who's assisting behind the scenes here today, along with Caitlin and Evan and Kevin. Thank you all. We'll share links out into the chat for the pre-order from the book from the publisher MIT Press, or from Amazon, where it's available in different formats, or of course, you can purchase it and pre-order it from your preferred bookstore. Before we dive in, let's take care of some logistics this morning. Please do say hi in the chat, introduce yourself, and let us know where you're joining from today. Our chat is open for today's discussion, and we have a healthy crowd here today, so please do keep it relevant and respectful, on topic, and use the chat to drop in questions for our panelists, and we'll work those into the Q&A as we come around towards the end of our conversation. Tomorrow, here's a question that everybody asked about, and it's already been raised in the chat. Yes, we are recording today's session, and all participants will receive an email containing today's recording, the shared links, and the chat transcript. So all of the information that we're presenting today will be preserved, made available on the Internet Archive, and in your inbox tomorrow. And now, as we get started here today, I'd like to welcome Brewster Kahle, the Internet Archive's founder and digital librarian, to the screen. How are you doing, Brewster?
Thank you, Chris, and it's wonderful to be here. I'm actually in the Internet Archive Canada's headquarters, getting to be in residence here for a while, which has just been great. And this is the subject everyone is talking about: is the AI opportunity, the what's happening with our data, and are we getting overrun? And also, sort of, what are the roles that are being played by, well, large publishers and data miners and the like. So this is a completely timely talk. I'm really wonderful to be able to hear this. I'm also would like to cite a book that is open access from Aram, that's from University of Massachusetts Press, the Piracy Crusade, which is, unfortunately, all old things are new again. It's about the music industry lawsuits. So I'm really happy to hear what's going on in this new book. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Brewster. And now I'd like to welcome Dave Hansen to the screen. So Dave is the executive director of Authors Alliance, who's co-sponsoring this book talk series, and who's having a 10-year anniversary next month, which you'll hear more about. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, all. Welcome to the book talk today. I am incredibly excited about this book. I think when Authors Alliance and Internet Archive launched this book talk series, one of the goals that I had was to really help find ways to educate creators, authors, about some of the pressing issues with technology and policy that are affecting them. And I think that this book really does a lot of that. It's an area where so much of how our data is collected and managed and processed is kind of hidden behind the scenes, but has a really big impact on day-to-day lives. If you're interested in Authors Alliance, or you haven't heard of us before, Authors Alliance is a nonprofit that exists to advance the interests of authors who want to serve the public good by sharing their creations broadly. Consistent with the theme of this book talk series, we tend to focus on issues related to emerging technology and law and information policy. So I invite you to join if you are a author of any type. We have authors that range from Nobel laureates to journalists to fan fiction writers. And what really unites us is a desire to see our work widely disseminated in the world and to promote access to knowledge and learning. So you can join for free. There's a link on the screen there. And you can check out our website. We have lots of resources for authors to navigate some of these kinds of issues. So Chris mentioned that we have a 10th anniversary coming up. And I think there may be a slide on this. Authors Alliance is 10 years old in May of 2024. We launched in the midst of some pretty significant litigation that you might remember years ago about access to books and digitization of books in the Google Books lawsuit and in the HathiTrust lawsuit that accompanied that. And what's been an interesting story since then is how we've seen the trajectory of cultural artifacts like books turn into data and as well information about people using those materials used as data to inform all sorts of things. You know, think of Amazon tracking your buying habits and kind of predicting what sort of books or other materials are of interest. So some of it's pretty cool, some of it's pretty disturbing. So join us if you're in San Francisco. We're really pleased, and thank you, Brewster and Internet Archive, for hosting us in person at the Internet Archive, May 17th, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. We have an all-star group of panelists who are going to be talking through issues related to authorship and technology, as well as monopolization and the emergence of both big publishing and big tech and how that affects authors in a day-to-day way. And then we'll have a really great keynote, I think, from Cory Doctorow, who will be concluding the event. So now I get to introduce our speakers. And this is kind of an all-star cast as well. So first I want to introduce Dr. Laura DeNardis, who is professor and endowed chair in technology, ethics, and society, and director of the Center for Digital Ethics at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Her book, The Internet in Everything, Freedom and Security in a World with No Off Switch by Yale University Press, was recognized as Financial Times top technology book of 2020. The book I know her most for is The Global War for Internet Governance, also published by Yale University Press. It's considered a definitive source for understanding cyber governance debates and solutions. Professor DeNardis is an affiliated fellow of the Yale Information Society Project, where she previously served as executive director, and is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Laura holds a engineering degrees and a PhD in science and technology studies, and was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship from Yale Law School. So Laura is going to be moderating the conversation today with Aram Sinnreich, who is professor and chair of communication studies at American University. Sinnreich's work focuses on the intersection of culture, law, and technology, with an emphasis on subjects such as surveillance, critical data studies, intellectual property, remix culture, and music. He's the author of 5 books. Brewster mentioned one already, The Piracy Crusade. I really encourage you to check it out. His other books include Mashed Up, published with UMass Press, The Essential Guide to Intellectual Property, a science fiction novel, A Second Chance for Yesterday, and of course, what we're going to hear about today, the forthcoming Secret Life of Data. And he has appeared in a lot of publications that are familiar to you, such as the New York Times, Billboard, Wired, Daily Beast, and Rolling Stone. He holds a MS in journalism from Columbia University and a PhD in communications from the University of Southern California. And our co-author with Aram is Jesse Gilbert. Jesse is a transdisciplinary artist working at the intersection of image, sound, and code, creating flexible frameworks that are activated in live performance via networked interaction. Or in installation settings. He was the founding chair of the media technology department at Woodbury University and has taught interactive software design at Cal Arts and UC San Diego. And as an aside, if you do a Google search for Jesse, some of this I think will come home just looking at some of the things that are associated with him online. So I'd encourage you maybe after the talk to do a little Google searching and see some of his work. He was presented across the globe, has presented across the globe, including at museums, performance venues, and universities in Los Angeles, Berlin, Istanbul, New York, Tokyo, Paris, Sao Paulo, Athens, and elsewhere. So as I said, we have a pretty all-star group, and I think those introductions give that away. So I am going to turn it over to Laura now, and she is going to take us into the part of this show that you really wanted to hear. So take it away, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Dave, and hi, everyone. It's just wonderful to join this discussion. Congratulations to Aram and Jesse on the launch of your new book, The Secret Life of Data. It seems like very recently I was at the launch of Aram's fiction book, which has some interesting parallels to this, which we might get into. But I thought it might be nice to start, if you could read a little bit from your book. I was just drawn into the thesis and also into some of the tensions that are inherent in the book in that opening story about Joseph D'Angelo. Would you mind reading a little of that for our wonderful audience?
Sure thing. Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting this. We're very excited to be here. I'm going to read from the introduction to the book. In 2018, a violent criminal who had terrorized California residents for over a decade was finally brought to justice more than 30 years after his last known crime. Joseph James D'Angelo, a former police officer, was arrested by Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies and charged with a dozen murders attributed to an elusive figure previously known only as the Golden State Killer. After troves of genetic evidence were presented at his trial, D'Angelo pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and was sent to prison for the remainder of his natural life. According to news coverage at the time of D'Angelo's arrest, the long cold case had finally been cracked thanks to technological advances. Old DNA samples were analyzed using modern genetic profiling techniques, and the results uploaded to an open-source genealogy website called GED Match, where investigators homed in on the killer's identity by tracing his family tree through profiles posted by other users on the site. Data was hailed as the hero in this case. Without the invisible strands of ones and zeros strung between our bodies, our identities, our markets, and our law enforcement system, justice would never have been served and the Golden State Killer would have remained at large. Even if genealogy websites weren't built for the purpose of aiding in criminal justice, outcomes like this have been trumpeted as examples of how new methods of data collection, storage, and analysis could make the world a better place by bringing clarity and accountability to antiquated systems hindered by guesswork, bias, and obscurity. Quote, "It is fitting that today is National DNA Day," District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert said at a press conference announcing the arrest on April 25, 2018. "We found the needle in the haystack." Yet, while many rejoiced at D'Angelo's capture and conviction, not everyone found comfort in the investigators' methods. As soon as the news broke, technology ethicists and civil rights advocates began to raise concerns about the broader implications of using ancestry databases to track suspected criminals. Should law enforcement have free rein to use DNA matching techniques in all cases, even those involving nonviolent crimes? Without adequate regulatory and judicial oversight, could techniques like this be used in a sloppy or even malicious fashion, potentially implicating blameless suspects? Should users of open source databases like GED Match be informed that their contributions might unwittingly make them genetic informants on their innocent family, as attorney Steve Mercer of the Maryland Public Defender's Office framed it in a USA Today interview? The legal and ethical waters became even muddier in 2020 when a Los Angeles Times investigation revealed that the official story about D'Angelo's identification and capture had omitted some important details. For one thing, law enforcement investigators didn't collect data only from the open source GED Match site. They also obtained data using a fake account on the private genealogy service Family Tree DNA. a potential violation of the company's terms of service. Additionally, police collaborated with a civilian geneticist who used her personal account on another private service, MyHeritage, to upload D'Angelo's DNA and explore his family tree without notifying the company of her true intentions. None of this data collection and analysis was undertaken with a warrant, which means that contrary to the pledges they'd made to their customers, Family Tree DNA and MyHeritage shared personal genetic information with the police even when they weren't required to by law. Despite these revelations, many people still believed the benefits of this foray into an ethical gray area were worth the risks. As the daughter of one of D'Angelo's victims told the Los Angeles Times, she didn't mind that practices were bent because the unmasking of the killer justified any potential violation of privacy, and the truth is what's important.
Less than 2 years later, another breaking news story raised the stakes even further, leading many people to reevaluate the relative merits of truth and privacy. In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its landmark decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, effectively ending half a century of safe and legal abortion throughout the United States and opening the door for numerous state laws that not only outlawed abortions, but treated women who sought them as murderers. Privacy advocates and supporters of abortion rights immediately began to raise the alarm about the risks of online data exposing abortion seekers to liability under these new laws. Simultaneously, many news outlets and nonprofit organizations began public awareness campaigns aimed at showing abortion seekers how to protect their digital footprints and thereby minimize their potential exposure to law enforcement. These concerns were not mere speculation or hyperbole. Even prior to the Dobbs decision, there were dozens of cases in the United States in which people's online search histories, chat archives, and other digital traces were used to prosecute them for terminating pregnancies, and even more such cases elsewhere around the world, especially in countries where abortion is not legal. In the wake of Dobbs, civil rights watchdogs began to look more closely at a newer set of risks for digital exposure: women's health tracking apps and biometric devices such as menstrual calendars and smartwatches. The same constellation of biotechnology, digital databases, identity tracking business models, and evolving norms about data privacy that had led to the Golden State Killer's arrest now threatened to expose millions of American women to prosecution for seeking a form of medical intervention they'd understood as a fundamental right throughout their entire lives. These tensions inherent in these two recent news events between public and private, physical and digital, legal and ethical, are at the heart of this book. Together, they exemplify the double-edged sword of life in the 21st century, a potent mixture of possibilities and perils emerging in a data-rich, globally connected society. Armed with smartwatches, home internet appliances, and an endless supply of apps, games, and streaming services, billions of us now spend our days and nights enmeshed in webs of digital sensors, machine learning algorithms, and overlapping information networks, all designed to reduce the minutiae of our lives into discrete data points. These data are then transmitted, stored, and analyzed for the purposes of predicting, evaluating, and influencing our behaviors in a never-ending feedback loop. While these new data systems have likely improved our lives in countless ways, they've also presented us with a host of new conflicts and conundrums that we still lack the ability or even a conceptual language to resolve. How can a MyHeritage user be expected to anticipate the risk that they may become a genetic informant on a distant unknown relative simply by submitting their own DNA to explore their family tree? How can a judge issue a warrant allowing police to investigate an individual suspect in a database for a specific crime without exposing all of the other people listed in the database to unwarranted surveillance? How can a technology user confidently wear a smartwatch or install a health tracking app when a future court decision might turn their digital medical records into evidence against them? These are just a few of the many analogous challenges we explore in this book. Though they encompass a broad range of settings, contexts, technologies, and cultures, what unites them is a phenomenon that we refer to as the secret life of data. The basic premise is simple, though its implications are complex. There is no limit to the amount and variety of data and ultimately knowledge that may be produced from an object, event, or interaction, given enough time, distance, and computational power. In even plainer language, it means that whatever we think we're sharing when we upload a selfie, write an email, shop online, stream a video, look up driving directions, track our sleep, like a post, write a book, or spit into a test tube, That's only the tip of the proverbial iceberg. Both the artifacts we produce intentionally and the data traces we leave in our wake as we go about our daily lives can and likely will be recorded, archived, analyzed, combined, and cross-referenced with other data and used to generate new forms of knowledge without our awareness or consent. This may be done not just once, but over and over by individuals and institutions we've never even heard of, using techniques that might not have been invented yet as technology and society continue to co-evolve over time. All of this adds up to something greater than the sum of its parts. Billions of us now live in a globally networked world, and our social structures and our personal relationships reflect this fact in innumerable ways. This means every time any of us creates or collects a piece of data, even through casual interactions with everyday technologies, we have a responsibility to consider how the information derived from it might affect our friends, our colleagues, our compatriots, and billions of people we've never even met. To borrow a phrase from a popular 20th century bumper sticker, we need to think globally whenever we act locally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great way to start the book, and so much comes up in this. But isn't the problem sometimes not that data is found, but that data is lost, which is why Internet Archive is such force for moral good in the world. So how would you respond to, let's say we have some people here, we've got a lot of participants, which is great. Maybe someone is thinking, well, I cannot get to my thesis, which is on a punch card or a magnetic tape, or I can't access something like a website that I used to be able to access, or my data on Friendster or some old social media platform, or they might be concerned about the resurgence of proprietary formats that impede interoperability. So, or have a loved one that passed away and they can't easily access the letters that are locked up in their emails. So how does the secret life of data also include that opposite side of the coin of data being lost rather than found?
That's a great question, and I'm glad we're addressing this first and foremost. We're not saying that everything that's ever captured by a sensor or stored in a database becomes instantly available to everyone for all time. We're saying there's no way to predict what will and won't be, and secondarily, how the data that does get preserved and does get unearthed might be used in unexpected ways. So, for instance, there were papyrus scrolls that were burned when Mount Vesuvius erupted in Pompeii thousands of years ago. And those scrolls are now being scanned using these new AI-assisted forensic techniques, and new poetry that people have not known about for millennia is now entering into the public domain. And interpersonal letters inscribed with cuneiform on clay tablets are being dug up and reinterpreted and scanned with high-powered forensic equipment. So you might not be able to recover your Friendster profile today, but that doesn't mean that somebody 50 years or 500 years from now won't be able to recover your Friendster profile. And who knows what kinds of intelligence may be derived once they do.
Fortunately, I never had a Friendster profile, so I should be good. But I did climb Mount Vesuvius recently and toured Pompeii, so that's a very, very interesting example. Now, Chris started with a discussion, and you also picked up on this, of how we all share so much information. But what's really clear in your book is about how people who have never, who don't share, they're not on social media, or they don't, promiscuously share information about themselves in other ways, but they're still affected by buying groceries or carrying on other everyday activities. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. I think it's an important point, and one that we address in the book, which is really to say that, there isn't an opt-out at this point for this process. We have to acknowledge a couple of things that are sort of precursors or presuppositions to the argument. One is that we're all carrying, mini computers, which you can't quite see in my camera, around with us. Many of us are. We are tracked via that for our location, for our interactions, for our purchases, for our likes and dislikes. And we are also surrounded by what we would call ambient computing, right? Where we have, CCTV camera feeds, we have facial tracking databases, we have, all number of ambient devices that are actually recording and moving with us through our daily lives that are producing data out of our the past that we take and the decisions that we're making. And I think that the bigger picture that is also raised in the introduction is that not only are the data that we produce being mined and the information being pulled from that, but they're being correlated with others. They're being correlated with other people's movements, with other people's decisions. And that correlation is something which is highly valuable from a business case. But I think that it raises the questions, as we said in the text, of how do you wrap your head around the implications of your decisions when this actually has much broader implications for even people that you don't know or that may have passed through the same space or may have similar politics or buying habits or medical conditions that you do. These are all questions that I think we have to ponder as we think about what has been created now.
Absolutely. And the stakes for privacy are so clear in the book, but there are other societal issues at stake that you raise in the book. And I was wondering if you could pick one of those and share it with our colleagues today.
Well, we think about it in terms of scalar. So the secret life of data, because we live in this, as Jesse said, this kind of environment of ambient computing and ubiquitous networks, it affects our lives from the biological to the global. So we interview disability rights activists in the book who talk about how their insulin smart pumps change their relationship to their bodies. And we talk to experts about the way that social media kind of inserts itself into our interpersonal relationships, such that we're always have kind of one eye on the likes while we're doing the business of liking one another. And it affects the institutions that we work for, whether our places of business or our schools, by inserting quantifiable metrics into the process of teaching and learning and reaching our productivity goals and self-actualizing our careers. And it affects our democracies at the national level by datafying the process of choosing our leaders and interacting with our elected officials and the people entrusted with the infrastructure of our society. And it affects our relationship to the environment at large. And there are these like global sensor nets that citizen scientists and professional scientists are using to keep track of ocean acidity and forest health and extraterrestrial objects passing through our solar system. And all of these different scales are being fed into databases that correlate with one another and build these incredibly complex images of the world that we are interacting with on our daily basis.
Excellent. Now, people may not know something personal about the two of you that I know, and that's that I think you met on the first day of ninth grade. Is that right? In a New York City school for science and technology, and then you both came of age during the dot-com boom when there was a tremendous amount of excitement about technology and the internet in particular. I was wondering if one or both of you would tell us what has surprised you the most about how technology has evolved. And I think people would love to know also, how did you embark on this book together?
So yes, we met at Stuyvesant High School in 1986. I saw the question in the chat there. And we've been really engaged in this conversation in one form or another since that time. Obviously, we couldn't have predicted the development and the proliferation of global information networks at that time, but we did live through the birth of the internet, and both of us have made careers in one way or another in relationship to that development. I think that in response to the question of what has been surprising, so there are a couple of things. I'll cover one of them, which I think as Aram kind of alluded to, we interviewed dozens of experts that we brought through the process and really tried to get inside the way that they think about their discipline, their medium, and how they frame some of the problems. And we decided at a certain point to have a kind of rough script of that interview, where at the end of it we asked all of our experts to put themselves in the position of being a supervillain and thinking about what it was that they would do with the knowledge they had in order to effect maximum harm, which is probably not a typical interview question. And what we found was that actually a surprising majority of the people that we asked responded effectively with the response, "I have never thought about that," or "I'm not sure if I'm really, that's not part of my disciplinary thought process." And I think that after a certain point in our interview cycle, we kind of turned to each other and said, "This is a finding. This is more than just a simple observation. This is something which reflects some of the sort of utopianism, the optimism that is embedded within the tech universe, that we're really not considering some of the potential downsides. We're not putting ourselves in that position to think about what could be done with what has been created." And I think that although obviously we don't only reflect all of those negative use cases in the book, we try to balance it between some of the promises and the perils. It was pretty surprising and significant that that was not top of mind for many of our experts.
Yeah, a corollary surprise was that, we talked to people across a really broad range of expertise and disciplines. So we talked to people who run data companies, we talked to anthropologists, we talked to artists, to attorneys and civil rights advocates. And what was dismaying is that none of these people were speaking the same language. So all of them were approaching the challenges that we describe in the book from one angle or another, but they're so siloed in terms of both their purview and their framework of analysis that there's very little hope for any dialogue between those silos. And that means that if we want to have a large enough conversation that we can invite everyday people whose lives are profoundly impacted by technology into the discussion about whether and how to proceed with further datafying our society, if we can't even get the experts to talk to one another, what hope do we have to get everyday people to be part of that conversation as well? And that's really what the book is for, is to kind of take one step down that line towards opening up that conversation.
Yeah, terrific. And by the way, someone we know in the chat said that he met his wife on Friendster. So I just wanted to point that out. So you're hinting at, and some of the chat discussions are hinting at also the rise of artificial intelligence. I want to ask you a little bit about that in reference to the secret life of data. This is certainly something that existed and was diffused into everything before you started the book. But there's something about the sudden surge in generative AI that is raising some of those questions that you just raised, that we don't have a common vocabulary. There's a moral panic. The intellectual property is a huge issue around this, authorship. How does that relate? How does generative AI fit into the secret life of data?
Aram, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. It's kind of like asking, how does electricity fit into the process of building a society, right? Generative AI has so many potential applications that there's no, any hot take that you hear about it's going to be garbage, because it's going to be ignoring 99% of those applications. So you mentioned intellectual property. Obviously, there are a bunch of lawsuits right now with plaintiffs like the New York Times suing OpenAI for using their articles without permission or payment as part of the machine learning data set. And, as a scholar of copyright and intellectual property, I don't actually know what to think of this, because there's very persuasive case law that says that, well, there's a thing called fair use. And if Google has fair use to show snippets on Google Books, then OpenAI should have fair use to not show snippets, but just kind of use them to inform a chatbot. But on the other hand, there's this massive transfer of wealth where the people who generated all of this valuable cultural information aren't being paid for it, and these hyper valuated AI companies are just stocking up billions and billions and billions of dollars of valuation and potentially making very lucrative contracts to use that tech and not paying any of it back. So that's like one tiny sliver. But generative AI also has these kind of second order consequences in terms of like the role that they play in our civil society, which maybe Jesse can speak to.
Yeah, I think again that's part of the challenge of the book, right? We're trying to talk about tangible, everyday use cases, and then shift the focus a little bit to what can come. And we're actually seeing that if you think about the power of generative AI combined with the desire to misinform the public, that is a very potent combination where obviously there are many benign use cases of generative AI. But we can point to this and look at that then tied to, for example, our current election cycle, where we're seeing images being generated that are, effectively not only falsifying, the bona fides of a given candidate, but actually also serving to muddy the waters about where the truth actually lies. And I think that is something which is a very interesting, longer term second order type of effect that generative AI can have. Because I think that once we've undermined the idea that an image or a video has a kind of inherent truth to it, right? And that we can do that at scale and produce these images with complete dexterity, and make them incredibly, realistic and lifelike. I think that it really is a slippery slope for us as a society of, how do we relate to, how do we, talk to the public about how to, have skepticism about images? How do we as, individual citizens navigate this media landscape where the truth itself is being undermined through these practices?
It's really amazing. If someone hasn't had a chance to read the book yet, what you'll notice, and I say this for any academics that might be here, the conceptual framework that you develop is so important. It's such a unifying theory for so many different things that are happening right now. And it's the diversity of topics and cases that you go through that fit within that are so important. I mean, well, we have a biodiversity and informatics person among our participants here. You get into biometric identification, the Internet of Things, AI, how all apps are Trojan horses. It all fits in here. The thing that doesn't fit as much with the others in my mind, but perfectly fits in the conceptual framework and really stands out is genetic information. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the moral issues around genealogy data. One of our participants said, "What can we do?" Just tell us a little bit about the moral considerations and if there's something that you want to say to people about what they can or can't do.
Sure. It's actually really well captured in the contrast between the story we told in the introduction about Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, and another case that we profiled in the book, which is about a graduate student who found out that she has a sibling that she never knew about. Her father, before she was born, had fathered a child. The mother didn't inform him and moved out of town and cut off all relations. And it was only because the daughter, whom we interviewed, uploaded some information to one of these genetic databases that she found out she had the sibling. Now, the father himself had not. So he was put into this no-win situation where he had never consented to be genealogically profiled, but all of a sudden he was confronted, and he was a deeply religious person who has very strong spiritual feelings about out-of-wedlock childbirth, and he was just informed out of nowhere that he had done precisely that thing 30, 40 years prior. And so our interviewee, the young woman who found out that she had a sibling, went through a really interesting process of grappling with that ethically. Like at first, she was kind of overjoyed to find out that she had a new family member and there was love in her heart. And then she felt kind of bad for her father for being confronted with this moral and ethical dilemma. And then she felt really proud and happy for her brother, who was able to track his birth parents through this genetic database. So it's not like there's a good guy and a bad guy, or like a good side and a bad side. We are presented with these conflicting visions of the good through our inexorable connection through these databases. And there's no reconciling we don't have a conceptual language to reconcile how do we weigh one person's good against another person's risk or cost. And as it turns out, what Jesse and I realized as we were working on the book is that it's a very clear case when it comes to genetic information, but the same thing applies to all data, because all data have the same kinds of familial relationships and networks. So when we reveal, by taking a photo on our iPhone, there's EXIF data that shows exactly the GPS coordinates in it. And there might be a passerby in the photo who did not consent to being photographed. But now, once we upload it to a social media platform, anybody who's looking can do a facial recognition and identify that this person was in this place at that time. And so the sense of obligation to think about what the secret life of our data might be is clearest when it comes to the genetic information, but is really a theme that runs through the whole book.
And just to add briefly to that, to build on the photograph example a little, again, we're at this point in the society where we have to make some collective decisions about our, shared ethics around this. So, for example, we know now that all of the photographs that have been posted to social media sites for many years have been fed through a missing children's database. Not with our, consent or informed consent. It's just something that the companies decided to do so that if a missing child is, photographed in the background of an image that's uploaded, that they can be identified and potentially found. And we might then, as a society, say, well, that is a valid use of facial recognition or the type of, aging algorithms that would say, what would this child look like, 10 years after they went missing? Because we think that we're addressing potential societal harm there. But it is an ethical, legal gray area, I think, as to whether or not those companies had an obligation to inform us. We might give them the pass on this one, but where does that line exist with any number of other decisions that are being made about the data that we upload? That's a dramatic example of one where we might say we're okay with this invasion of our privacy, but what others are there that we might not be?
Well, then there's like a third order consequence, right? Which is, so they build the infrastructure, both technologically and institutionally, to scan social media photos for missing children and to age them up so that they can identify what they might look like today. And then those same technologies are sold into law enforcement agencies, which create, based on genetic evidence left behind at a scene, a projected phenotype profile of what a suspect in a crime might look like. And then they apply that profile to facial recognition algorithms and scan historical footage of public events. And that's another step down the slippery slope that couldn't have existed without the kind of legitimized usage in the public interest that Jesse just described, but that a lot of us would feel a lot ickier about, especially as things that we previously thought of as moral and legal and ethical, like, say, safe and legal abortions, become outlawed and potentially cause for criminal prosecution.
Absolutely. This ethical gray area that you describe is not only external and about our relationships with society and law enforcement and each other. There's also a deeply intimate and internal concept that you raise in the book about how we see ourselves differently through the devices that we use and the data. And you came up with this really interesting name for it, algo-vision. Can you tell us what you mean by algo-vision?
Yeah, so I think that the term really is reflecting the idea that we have begun to articulate a language, as Aram mentioned earlier, of doing it for the likes, right? understanding how we're going to be viewed in the eyes of an algorithm, and then incorporating that into our own self-conception. And I think that this has, there's a kind of, again, we're on the knife edge with this, because there are behaviors that you could say we're, optimizing our lives, or, whether we have a fitness tracker, or we're thinking about a social media presence. There is a certain sort of like level of participation that we could say is healthy, that is encouraging. But then we've also seen, for example, the pressure. If you think about the relative surge of popularity of plastic surgery in relationship to our ubiquitous presence on streaming conferencing platforms such as this, that there's actually a significant finding that many plastic surgeons have reported that their incoming patients are actually requesting plastic surgery because they don't like the way they look on these type of platforms. And I think that, we need to, again, I think we're just repeating sort of some of the same rhetoric here, that we need to think as a society as to what are those healthy boundaries and lines. We live in a world where we've also anthropomorphized algorithms, right? Whether it's Siri and Alexa, but now even just the idea of communicating with an algorithm, or thinking of it as a presence that you have to modify, gaming the algorithm. This is something, I've been programming for a long time. I've been in this industry for many decades by now. I don't think that those of us who are involved in the early stages of computer culture could have anticipated that this would be part of our, shared language and dialogue. This is far scaled beyond what I think we could have anticipated.
Yeah, and even science fiction images of the role of artificial technology in artificial intelligence in the future, didn't account for that, right? Like in 2001, Dave doesn't get awkward around Hal's ubiquitous eye, right? He just kind of goes about his business, picks his nose, eats his food, washes his socks, and you don't. Even in that forward-thinking vision of the role of AI as a ubiquitous presence in human culture, it doesn't include the feedback loop between the human's kind of self-conception and the way that we see ourselves refracted through the lens of these systems. But I also want to, lest we sound too doom and gloom, Jesse and I, throughout the book, take great effort not just to kind of wring our hands and raise the alarm, but to talk about the benefits of some of these technologies and the ways in which the unexpected uses of them can actually confer positive social effects. So AlgoVision is a great example, because there are all kinds of ways in which people's algovisual capacities, their ability to think about how they're going to be seen through the eyes of the algorithm, actually builds political power and cultural power and increases people's sense of self-efficacy. So one example, for instance, is there was a great app called Uber Cheats. As it turns out, the rideshare company Uber was cheating drivers by kind of lying about what the distance from their source to their origin was. And somebody developed an app called Uber Cheats that allowed drivers to kind of compare their actual trip on a map to the Uber's algorithm's version of what was on their map and see exactly how much they were being shortchanged. And that was put out for free and downloaded, thousands or more times. And it's this kind of communal resistance to the algorithmic gaze that can only happen through internalizing that gaze that makes AlgoVision into both a vulnerability, but also kind of a superpower. And we take great pains to show both sides of that coin in the book.
I think you do. And why don't we invite Dave in? He has been we've been looking at the interesting questions and engaging a little bit, but he has been delving deeply into these. And Dave, what are some questions for Aram and Jesse from our participants?
Yeah, thank you both. This was a phenomenal conversation. I feel bad jumping in because I didn't want to stop, but we have some really good questions. One of which actually comes from someone in biodiversity informatics, talking about kind of on the positive side of uses of data a split between those who have resources to process openly available data and those who don't. And so I guess the question there is, what are your thoughts on open data and equal access to compute power?
That is such a great question. There are several ways into it. I'll raise one, and then I'm sure Jesse will have more to add. One of the kind of promising ideas that we talk about in the book is what we call triangulation. And the notion is this, that a lot of AIs kind of do what the social theorist Donna Haraway used to call the God trick, presenting kind of all of the data assimilated from one kind of God's eye view and suggesting that there's only one interpretation and one kind of centralized vantage point to make sense of the data. But we actually profile a bunch of different projects that instead of doing the God trick, produce a kind of multifaceted, multivalent view into collaborative data sets, and offer interfaces and analytical frameworks into those data that triangulate some version of reality based on the multiple perspectives that both feed into the data set and that draw from the data set. And some of the stuff that we were talking about before, for instance, the citizen scientist forestry watching or ocean analysis, or the Global Fireball Observatory, use this kind of triangulation method. So I think, without question, it's massively expensive to run a huge data center, and even storing data is massively expensive at scale. And so that creates, a tiny 1% of 1% of haves versus the rest of us have-nots. But the more we develop open source platforms to create collaborative databases and collaborative interfaces into those databases, not only does that make up some of the ground that's lost to the moneyed interests, but there is a kind of accuracy and social power in producing a multi-perspectival relationship to data that a single moneyed interest can't possibly accomplish on its own.
Yeah, I think that's a great way into talking about this idea of crowdsourced stewardship that we kind of brought forward in the book, building on that argument a little bit that there's also an ethos that's emerged around these citizen science movements. What's ironic about, for example, the Global Fireball Network is that it's again a use case of the dash cam footage and doorbell camera footage that citizens are contributing, that are recording at all times, and looking at the trajectory of meteorites that are coming through the Earth's atmosphere and landing as a way to triangulate between these positions. Obviously, all of those are geotagged, right? We're building on the same set of technologies that we might have serious concerns about if you're thinking about, a dash cam or a doorbell camera in the context of a law enforcement investigation, in which individuals would be compelled to give up their footage to corroborate a crime. I think that what Aram also alluded to recently, just before, is that in looking at some of these positive use cases, that there are these emergent movements that are happening that not only get us to more accurate results, but also involve the public in a conversation about the data and the techniques that are being used, and that therefore we have a more informed citizenry. And I think that's the real aim of the book, is to participate in that process.
So we're going to do one more. And actually that is a perfect lead into this question, is a really basic one of what can the average person do just to find out, not necessarily to remove or to change, but just find out what of their data is being shared through these networks. Is there anything?
There are so many things. And the problem is right now there's no single way to find out. That's really part of the challenge. So you can think of this kind of cycle between culture and technology and business as having these kind of pressure points, which Dr. DeNardis likes to talk about in her work. And you can press on any of these points to kind of have some influence over how data is collected and used. So one of the levers is policy. Right now, there is a new bill that has been introduced into the US Congress, the APRA, which will provide some degree of data privacy to American citizens if enacted, kind of analogous to, but in some ways weaker than the GDPR in the EU. I realize I'm using a lot of acronyms. I apologize for that. And so one of the things that we can do is we live in a democracy and we have elected representatives, and we can tell those elected representatives, I want you to support data privacy. If you want my support in the next election, you have to support my data privacy in passing these kinds of laws at the state and at the federal level. But another point of contact that we have is with businesses, right? I was an avid Dropbox user for 15 years. I paid for Dropbox Pro every year. And then, like so many other companies, Dropbox announced that they were going to scan everything in my cloud storage archive and feed it into machine learning algorithms, whether I wanted them to or not. And I wasn't going to get anything for it. They were just going to do it. And somehow that was going to make life better for me. And my response was, screw you. I'm going to take all of my data out of your cloud and I'm going to put it on the servers of this company called Proton, which is based in Switzerland and which has default encryption, such that even they can't read the files that I store in their cloud. So I voted with my wallet in that case. But the third and the most important pressure point is neither technological nor business-based nor policy-based, but is cultural, right? So I like to joke about, I have teenage kids, and whenever we get an Airbnb, as soon as we walk in the door, my son will say, Alexa, play Despacito. And that's his way of checking if there's an ambient computing device surveilling us, at least auditorially. And sometimes it actually does start playing Despacito. And that's how we know that we're being listened to and that, our private conversations are going to be, analyzed by people at Amazon or outsourced by Amazon. And so normalizing, for instance, like when I walk in the door of your home, if you would say to me, welcome to my house, please take off your shoes. By the way, Alexa is on, would you like me to turn it off? And can I get you a glass of water? By normalizing that conversation and acknowledging the fact that there's ambient computing and network devices in our lives and that those have consequences, it's a form of kindness that we can do to one another that can substantively change the quality of our culture.
Yeah, I think just only to add on that briefly is to say, these are larger issues than either of us can, we can't map all of the possible n-dimensional use cases of the secret life of data. There's no way for us to do that. I think that part of the aim of the book is really to bring more voices into this conversation than simply tech advocates or policy wonks, that we need common sense inputs into this dialogue and this debate. And I would really encourage everyone in this, this online group to really become active and to think this through yourself, because I think we need much more of a diversity and range of opinions and inputs into this discussion than we currently have. And I think that's really going to be the thing that we as individuals can do.
Thank you both. We are getting close to the end. I want to turn to Laura. Thank you so much for moderating this conversation. If you have any last concluding thoughts or questions, I'd like to invite you to go ahead, and then Chris will sort of wrap us up.
Yeah, I want to end by congratulating Aram and Jesse for this incredible contribution that is not only a major academic and scholarly contribution, but also one that is very accessible. And I think it's going to be widely read, including by policymakers. So it's extremely accessible. And they end on a positive note in their chapter on data and democracy. And I will just leave it at that to entice people to read it. But I appreciate their, raising critical issues, but also giving us some hope in an environment where people seem to be on this wild pendulum swing between dystopian and utopian views of technology and society. So thank you for that, and for all of the many accessible things in the book and ways that we can change and be part of the change. And congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Internet Archive and to Authors Alliance for organizing this. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today, and Laura, thank you so much for facilitating such a fantastic conversation. To a point in the chat, yes, this session is being recorded, and everyone will get an email tomorrow that has a link to all the resources that we've shared here and to the recording. So if you want to replay or if you missed any part of the conversation, we will preserve it all. So as we wind down here today, I want to make sure that you grab a copy or at least put on your pre-order for The Secret Life of Data. I can't wait until my copy arrives, my hard copy. I like to read out of physical books, and especially ones that I want to add to my permanent collection. So please do put that pre-order in. It helps the authors, it helps the sales to have a great day on the first day. So please do put in that pre-order. Winding down here, I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events that I think you'll want to attend. You won't want to miss these. So next month on May 9th, we'll be hosting author Dan Sinnreich to talk about his new book. In Big Fiction, Sinnreich explores how changes in the publishing industry have affected fiction, literary form, and what it means to be an author. He'll be joined for the conversation by humanities scholar Ted Underwood. And then, as we mentioned at the start of our conversation, on May 17th, Dave and his colleagues will be hosting an in-person celebration at the Internet Archive for the 10th anniversary of Authors Alliance. The program features a keynote, as we said, from sci-fi author, one of my favorite authors and journalist, Cory Doctorow. And that is being held in person at the Internet Archive on May 17th. So I hope you can make it to the Bay Area and celebrate with Authors Alliance, Dave and his colleagues in person. So to close down here, I do would like to wrap, as we always do, with commitments and thank yous. So today's session, as we've said, will be the recording will be shared, archived on Internet Archive, and sent out to everyone with an email tomorrow with the links to all the resources that we've gathered here today. For our thank yous, a big thank you to our authors, Aram and Jesse, for writing the book, for putting such an interesting content together and joining us for the conversation today and really helping us understand, the reality of what happens in our networked world and the data that we're consciously or unconsciously sprinkling around. Thanks also to Laura for facilitating this conversation and to Dave Hansen and to Authors Alliance for co-hosting our session today. And of course, as always, to you, our audience, for your time and enthusiasm. I know we could have gone for another hour here with the conversation, which is always a great sign. So I hope that you get your pre-order in and maybe throw some questions online to Aram and Jesse. We have final links out in chat if you'd like to watch any of the book talks that we've had over the past 4 years of doing this series. They're all preserved and they're available for viewing on archive.org, just like this chat will be later on today. And also check out our calendar of events, because that's where you can find out what's the latest and greatest of what's happening in and around the Internet Archive. So to sign off here today, I hope that you can join us at one of those upcoming events. Thank you all. Have a great day.